Hi there, and welcome to Military Histories, a podcast from York Army Museum. Each week we share an interview from the Royal Dragoon Guards audio archive. Throughout March we will be sharing interviews about family life. You can find more details about the Royal Dragoon Guards Oral History Project in the show notes. If you want to find out a bit more about our museum, there are links to our website and social media channels in the show notes too. In this week's interview you can hear Mrs Jean Santry, whose father and husband both served with the 5th Inniskilling Dragoon Guards. Thanks for listening. Future episodes will drop every Saturday.
This interview is with Jean Santry, wife of Major Noel Santry. The date is the 18th of October 2013, and this interview is conducted at their home near Enniskillen. Jean, how nice to see you again. Where did you start with the regiment?
My first memories of going out to the regiment started in Belfast when my dad joined the band of the 5th Royal Inniskilling Dragoon Guards. And I remember it particularly well because in those days nobody flew anywhere. So we went on a boat from Belfast to Haitian, my mother and my 2 sisters and brother. And we got off the boat at Haitian. We got onto what was then called the boat train and arrived in London, where luckily enough we were met by my mother's uncle, who was an ex-army officer, and he took us in a black taxi across London to then pick up a train which then took us to Harwich. We then got on another ship at Harwich and again overnight to the Hook of Holland. And I can remember it extremely well because I was the eldest of the 4 of us and I wasn't 6 years of age. And trying to help my mum with the other 2 and my baby brother. Anyway, we got on the train when we got off the boat in the Hook of Holland and proceeded to Germany, where my dad then met us at Paderborn Station. There was army transport, can't remember what it was, but we then were taken to Barker Barracks, to this huge great block in the barracks itself, which were the army quarters. And I remember going up these stone stairs into this corridor, is the only way I can describe it. And my mother, bless her, having a fit when she saw all these doors off this corridor and saying, "Oh, Jimmy, how am I going to keep these children quiet with all these flats here?" And my dad turning round to her and saying, "Sarah, this is your flat. All these doors belong to you." And that is a very, very vivid memory. I also remember the people that lived in the block quite well. There were the boardmans underneath us. Across the corridor in the flat next to us were the walkers. Don't really remember much about who were above us, but I do remember all of us children playing together. I also remember at the top of this block there was a huge attic with all the washing lines, where we used to go up and play regularly when it was raining, but there was also a play park quite close to the blocks where we all would have played. I also remember going to school on the school buses. We went to the All Arms Training Centre in Senelager to a school in the barracks there. And very, very happy memories. We always had a soldier escort on the bus who wasn't behind doors clipping your ear if you misbehaved. And it was a very, very happy time while we were there. And coincidentally, would you believe that nearly 55, 60 years later, my daughter Sarah is this very day teaching at that same school in the All Arms Training Centre. We've been and we've had a look, my sisters and I. The classrooms are all, the building's the same. When she said she'd got the job out there and I said to her, "Where is it?" And she said, "In the All Arms Training Centre." I said, "Sarah, it's not by any chance like a whitish block with a raised playground at the back and stone stairs all the way up and she said to me, "Oh, Mum, come on. You must have read about it somewhere." I said, "No, Sal, that's the school that we went to when we were in Barker Barracks, and later went to again when the regiment went out to Athlone Barracks in Sennalarga. We went for a short while before we all went off to Ham boarding school." I then also remember the regiment getting posted off. Dad couldn't come with us, and he went off somewhere. Could have been Suez or Aden or somewhere like that. But we went into a transit barracks in Hull, and it was the most appalling place, freezing cold, 6 and 7 families all in the one room. And my mum getting fed up and saying, "We're not staying here. We're going home to Belfast." And we went home and stayed with my granny until such times that the regiment went to Catterick. And that was the first stint in Catterick, and we went to Catterick there. We went into like a prefab quarter to start off with. And then when my brother Peter was born, we moved up into a proper house in Menin Road in Catterick, and it was like going from rags to riches. It was absolutely lovely. My sisters, well, the 4 of us actually went to Ainslines School for a little while, and then shortly after that we moved to a Catholic school in Richmond and went on the buses every day. And we were in Catterick then for quite a while, until it would have probably been January 1957. And I remember that day as well, when the whole regiment went on a regimental train from Camp Centre back out to Sennalarga in Paderborn. And we picked up the train there. The whole regiment was on board it. And we again went to Harwich and across to the Hook of Holland, and then again landed in Sennalarga and went to Sativeg, to brand new quarters. And I say, another thing that sticks in my mind was all the families were on the coach and being delivered to the different quarters. And there was a family called Rumble. And Mrs. Rumble was allocated, we were 11 Sativeg, and she was allocated 13 Sativeg. And she was so superstitious that she wouldn't actually get off the coach and go into the quarter. And we sat in that coach quite late at night till finally she agreed that she would go into the quarter in Sennalarga. My mother even offered to swap houses because she wasn't superstitious. But I think because I was sort of probably 12, 13 then, thinking to myself, what the heck are we doing sitting on this coach? What's wrong with this lady? What's wrong with number 13? Sort of style, you know. And all us kids laughing. There were loads of people on the coach. There were the Raymonds and the cooks, and it was just absolutely lovely. And then it was shortly after that we went back to the same primary school in the All Arms Training Centre for a matter of weeks till the half term came up, and then all of us of a certain age went off to Ham boarding school. And happy time. That really was a very happy time at boarding school. We all loved it. My two sisters and I.
You had a different experience from me then, because I hated it.
Oh, we loved it.
All I wanted to do was run away.
And our Pat, was probably the same age as you, she didn't go at first because she wasn't quite old enough. And then of the 3 of us, she was the shyest and the quietest. When it came to leaving, she cried her eyes out, and my mother couldn't stop her crying at all at leaving Ham boarding school. And then we left there because my dad was posted as recruiting sergeant to Belfast. And when we all came to Belfast, we lived in Hirings for a while, and then when Dad was posted back, no, it was while we were in the hiring on the Antrim Road near the North Irish Horse, that Patrick Brooking, who was the adjutant at the horse at the time, worked quite closely with Dad, and he was in our house quite a lot. Lovely, lovely, lovely man. And it was during that time, because I'd by then finished at the Secretarial College, asked me was I interested in going to work at the North Irish Horse. And I had sort of said to him, it'll be difficult because of religion in those days to get into the civil service in Northern Ireland. And he said, not a problem, we'll sort it. So I then left the job that I was working as in a skirt manufacturers to one of the directors, as one of the director's secretaries, and went to work at the North Irish Horse. Great job, pay doubled, thought I was rich. Absolutely, well, I was rich, And of course it was during that time that Noel was posted as a PSI to the North Irish Horse. And I met my Waterloo, to put it mildly. Having swore I'd never marry a soldier and I wanted to stay as a civvy and not do any more travelling, the opposite happened. But I think Noel enjoyed his time at the horse. It was totally different for him. And then
Did you know he was from the Skins? He could have been Queen's Royal
Yes,
Irish.
I did know. I knew he was from the Skins because where I worked at the horse, I would have dealt with them,
Of course.
PSIs being posted in and out. And he was posted in as a Skin. Brian Julian, another great friend, was already there as a Skin. Guy Wathen, Colonel Guy Wathen, was the training major there at the time. And at the time that Noel was there, he left, and Charles Gilchrist Fisher came as the training major as well. So, I worked as a secretary to them as well while they were at the horse. And then we got married in 1964, and believe it or not, we had quite a big military wedding on the Glen Road in Belfast. Now, if any soldiers were likely to go to the Glen Road in Belfast now, they might meet their Waterloo, if you know what I mean. But it was a lovely occasion. Lovely. We had a guard of honour of the 2 Skins, 2 North Irish Horse and 2 Queen's Royal Irish. And Dad was there in blues, Noel was there in blues, and the best man, groomsman were as well. Noel was then told that he was posted back to the regiment and he would be going to Aden, while C Squadron, his old squadron, were going to Hong Kong. So we consciously made the decision that I would go over and live with Noel's mother and work in England while he was in Aden. Went over, put stuff in storage, all the wedding presents went in storage, as you can imagine, and went over and stayed with Noel's mother. He was on leave before going back to the regiment. Had to go down to Tidworth to get the injections for going to Aden. Went down to Tidworth, came back the next day and said, get yourself sorted, I'm going back to my old squadron, C Squadron, and we're going to Hong Kong accompanied. As you can imagine, I nearly passed out to go to somewhere like Hong Kong as a 21-year-old was, well, it just wasn't done in those days,
Film
was
star
it?
stuff.
Filmed, absolutely. Anyway, we got jabs and all sorted out, and off we set and to join a party of Skins at Gatwick Airport to fly out. It was December and the weather was so bad, you would not believe it, that we couldn't fly. And so they sent us to the Grand Hotel in Brighton overnight, which there again, to go to the Grand Hotel in Brighton, was absolutely fabulous. Anyway, it took us 3 days to fly to Hong Kong. We arrived at night, and the first thing that hits you was the heat and the smell. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we were there, picked up in a Land Rover. We didn't have a quarter, we were told we had a hiring. And we were picked up in a Land Rover and taken in the dark along this road, which hadn't a clue where we were, taken down big steep steps and into this flat. Unbelievable. But the flat looked absolutely lovely, but we were so tired that we just went straight to bed. And then the next morning, got up, pulled the shutters up, the Venetian blinds, and nearly died because there was the South China Sea.
On the
There, we
doorstep.
could have reached it. We could have reached it. Went out to explore, and there was like a private beach for us and everything. Now, come on, you leave Belfast as a 21-year-old, and as a 22-year-old, you're in Hong Kong. And then 2 days later, this little Chinese girl showed up, and she says, I'm here, I'm your ama, I'm your maid. And I can remember saying to Noel, I don't need a maid. What do I need a maid for just the two of us, you know? He says, you have no choice. This is what's got to happen, you know. But anyway, fabulous. But I was lonely. I was homesick, to be honest with you. And I used to go down to the beach every day and have a quick wee paddle and a sit and read and look at the sea and think, oh my God, you know, that water could be going into Belfast. What am I doing sitting here on my own, you know? And so I just decided that I had nothing to do in the house because all the cleaning, the washing, the ironing, the cooking and all was done for me. I'd go and find myself a job. So I took myself in the dollar taxi, still considering myself really, really brave. Nobody to help me, nobody to give me advice from the squadron or anything, you know, that Noel was with, and went to what was then known as the PCLU, Pioneer Corps Labour Unit, in Kowloon, and said, look, here I am, I'm a qualified shorthand typist. Have you got any jobs, basically? And they said, well, will you do a wee test? And I said, yeah, no problem. Did the test and said, well, you know, what about it? Any luck? And he said, can you start tomorrow? And I said, oof, hang on a minute, my husband doesn't even know I'm here. I'll have to go home and sort of break it gently to him, you know. But did that, and I started working in the Land Forces headquarters on Hong Kong Island as a confidential shorthand typist there. Used to travel on the Star Ferry, dollar taxi, Star Ferry across to the island and work there, which in itself was an experience because, to be honest with you, in those days, army wives were pretty innocent sort of people. You know, you wouldn't have known about anything really. But working for the INT and the SIB on confidential matters, I was well and truly educated to the extent that I used to come home and say to Noel, look, I feel really ignorant and I know I shouldn't be saying this to you, but what is this and what is so and so? And he used to say to me, how do you know about that? I said, because I sat in an SIB interview. Oh my God, you know. So it was a very, very interesting, happy year. We had wonderful boat trips with the squadron, pretty good wives club even then. We actually lived in what was known as Millionaires Row. They were all big, big, big villas. There were 3 flats. Curly Norton and Anne Norton lived above us. They were skins. And on the top floor, there was an RMP and his wife. Next door to us, and we got very friendly with him, was a guy that ran the whole of the television and broadcasting service in Hong Kong. And along for him was a Portuguese millionaire. And he had his own private chapel. And the Royal Naval Chaplain from Hong Kong Island used to come every Sunday in a launch and say mass there. So we didn't actually go to the army church. We went along to this little Portuguese chapel every day. And they were very kind because every time there was any sort of celebration, they put a party on in their garden and all, you know. So the year in Hong Kong was very, very good. We then came home and the next posting was Benghazi, Libya. Place on the map that I wouldn't even known existed. So we had Christmas at home and then we travelled out to Libya after that, staging through Hendon, RAF Hendon in London, and being taken to the airport to fly to Benghazi, which actually has very, very happy memories and not so happy memories, as anybody that was in Benghazi will know. We had a lovely quarter in the barracks, very nice. I again went to work, and I went to work as the PA to the area commander, Cyrenaica area commander, which was a lovely job in the Aosta barracks, the barracks down the road from us, which was absolutely superb. We had great mess life, absolutely super mess life in Benghazi. We only worked to lunch times. We went to the beach most afternoons. Noel and I were extremely lucky that we played, which everybody did, radio bingo on the radio once a week. And one week we were lucky enough to win the four corners, single line and the full house, and we won a load of money. We'd been saving to buy a Fiat 500 while we were out there. But with winning this vast amount of money, we were able to buy a Volkswagen Beetle. And it was the most beautiful blue Beetle you ever did see. And we were probably the only people, actually, that had a car. And I think that was because we had no family.
You didn't have the family at the time.
We didn't have a family at the time. It wasn't for the want of trying, mind you. It was just the way life was treating us. But Benghazi, I have very happy memories, as well as the dreadful troubles, which finished it for all of us. And it wasn't a pleasant time. I can remember going on the parade on the Saturday. Noel was CO's guard commander, watching the parade. That's correct. Going into work on the Monday, and the whole situation blew up. I can remember vividly, because of where I worked for the area commander, that the troubles got really, really bad. And I can remember General Henry Woods, who was commanding officer at the time, coming down to discuss it with the area commander as to what they were going to do, because there were loads of families downtown. I can remember all of being privy to that because of who I worked for. I can remember being asked to go into the signal centre and operate a teleprinter, which I'd never seen in my life, on the day that the troubles broke out. What I did find was quite disturbing was that C Squadron, God bless them all, were sent down that day into the town. Not very well prepared and not very well armed in any shape or form to deal with any riots. But I could hear them on the radio until such times as the aerials were all broken off. And I can remember going back to my own office from the signal centre and Major Richard Keatley coming into Aosta with another lot of people and sort of saying to me, "Oh, Mrs Santry, how lovely to see you. Your husband's doing a fine job downtown." Now, bear in mind at this time, I knew C Squadron had been on standby to go down. I knew some of them had gone down with the squadron leader in a Saracen. I knew in those days that Noel was always in a ferret. I'd heard a lot of radio communications, and Richard Keatley then coming in and saying, "Oh, they're doing a fine job down there," which did not please me. It frightened me. It really did frighten me. And he said to me, "Your dad's outside," he said. We're in the Aosta barracks ready to go down to do a little bit of relieving. If you want to go and see your dad, go and see your dad." And I can remember going out onto the parade square in the Aosta barracks and seeing Dad, and they had hockey sticks.
That's right.
Pick helves.
Dustbin lids.
And bin lids.
Bin lids.
And I said,
That was
saying
the
to
riot
Dad,
squad.
"What are you doing?" He says, "Well, we might have to go down to relieve C Squadron." Anyway, couldn't get home that night. Schools couldn't get home. They then the REMI had to work on the school buses and put all the grills up so that we could get home, and I was able to get home. But in the meantime, dreadful, dreadful, dreadful things had happened downtown, which, because I worked for who I worked for, I was aware of. And I seriously was a nervous wreck. Anyway, I then, there was an opportunity to get back home to Wavell Barracks, and the only way of getting back home was to go back with the school children who hadn't been able to get home at lunchtime. But in order for us to get anywhere, Remy had to put like wire crates on the side of the school bus. And anyway, we all eventually got in. It probably was about 9 o'clock at night by then. And off we set from the Oster Barracks. We had an armed escort, I do remember that. And we were stoned between the Oster Barracks and Wavell Barracks. These great big bricks were hitting the wire, and the children were all screaming and all. And I was trying my best to help, but it didn't make any, you couldn't stop children crying. But anyway, luckily enough, we got back to Wavell Barracks. In the meantime, lots of our families had been brought in from just outside the barracks to start off with. And I was home just a short spell of time. Noel didn't know where Noel was. And we had the Straughans and their 3 children come to live with us in this 2-bedroom bungalow. So it was a bit of a squeeze, but I decided that I would give the Straughans the 2 bedrooms and Noel and I 2 army camp beds in the sitting room. Anyway, got the Straughan, got Ermgard and the children settled, and then Joey and Noel came home. And they were, the only way I can describe Noel was that he was high on adrenaline, you know? And he said, I said, I know where you've been. He said, how would you know where I've been? I said, because, you know, and explained to him. And he said, you know, I really could do with the bath. And he turned round to go out, and I said to him, Noel, you have no tail, no back on your shirt. And he said to me, oh, don't be so stupid. I said, I promise you I'm not being stupid. And I went over and I lifted his shirt up, and he had a gash about 6 inches long in the back of his, along his back, and it was bleeding, and it was, look, and I said to him, you know, I think you really ought to go over and to the BMH and let them have a look at that. Oh, don't be ridiculous. I said, well, the only way that I can treat it is to pour a bottle of TCP over it. Oh, that'll be fine, he said.
You would have said that until it touched.
So he went into the bath and I went in with this old-fashioned bottle of TCP, and I didn't pour it over him, but I put loads on some gauze, and I did his back, and he did scream, and he had quite a nasty gash. Then he, sitting in the bath, he's proceeding to tell me about Melise Graham in front of him getting a brick in the back of his head, and about the dreadful thing, other thing that had happened with the squadron leader's Saracen. And I said to him then, actually, love, you don't need to tell me, because I know I was in Signal Centre when it all was coming through and what was happening. He then did tell me that Billy Walker and Ron Tiernan were in the vehicle, I said, which I didn't know at that time. And I think, as I said before, I may not have, that Billy and I had gone back to Barker Barracks time, grew up as children together. So went to work. Guy Wathen was the second in command, and when I couldn't get to the Oster Barracks the next day, he asked Noel would I go in and work in RHQ, and I went in and worked in RHQ. And it would have been 2 days after the actual riots that I attempted to go to the hospital to see Billy Walker. Thought I needed to do it because we'd gone back so far. But it wasn't a very successful trip to the hospital. Let's just leave it that way. And something that'll stay with me for a long time. But working in RHQ was very interesting because I knew Major Wathen quite well, him having been at the Horse. Didn't know Henry Woods and was actually a little bit frightened of him. thought, oh my God, I'm going in to take dictation from this man, who is he, sort of style. But it was an interesting few weeks there, because it was at that time where I was typing things like send notes round all the families, pack one suitcase, make sure you've got a pillow and a blanket and one item of sentimental value in case we've all got to move out. Sounds very dramatic now,
It was.
but at the time it was horrendous. And I can remember Noel and Joey Strawn coming home, both of them with their SMGs, bringing them into the house and all, and even that alone. But I'll tell you a funny incident, and it is extremely funny. But the Straughns were the most delightful people to have to stay with you. But it was a bit difficult stretching food for two to feed seven. But I managed quite well. But they were allowed out on one day to clear their fridges to bring food in, because the NAFI was running out of food in the barracks. The cookhouse were doing their very best and supplying bread and all for us, but everything else you just had to make do and mend. But they were let out one day to clear the fridge. And I'm sure Irmgard wouldn't mind me saying this. Joey's long gone, God rest his soul, but they were let out to clear the fridge. And I thought, God, this will be great, because she's been feeding 5 of them. She'll have her fridge well stocked. Come back. And they arrived back. No food. And I thought, oh God, how am I going to cope? Where am I going to go to get food? Where am I going to make what we've got, tins and things like that, stretch? Every bit of meat, as people will know, was frozen anyway. And she brought back a scooter and a bicycle for the children to play, and her birth control pills. And she made this big deal of the birth control pills. And I said nothing, because to be honest with you, I really didn't have much of a clue about birth control pills in those days. And I can remember saying to Noel, said, when he came home, so you're all right now, you've got a bit more food. I said, no, they didn't bring any food. They brought a scooter and a wee bike for the children and their birth control pills. I said, for God's sake, we're hardly seeing you men. What the hell do we need birth control pills for? So we funny things like that. But one of the hardest things to do was to think of something of sentimental value to put in your suitcase. Until I had a visit from Margot Cooney, who was staying with the Clipstons, a couple of bungalows up from us. And Margot came to see me that day. We had a long chat and a cup of coffee. And of course, she'd been evacuated from the town. And the one thing that she lifted was her wedding album. And I thought, do you know, that is a brilliant idea. Because of all the things that happen in your life, that is one day that you want to remember. So I can remember putting our wedding album into the suitcase. I also remember Noel saying, these Libyans, these Arabs are not going to have my car. What I am going to do is build a bonfire under it, and if you go before I go, or I have to go somewhere else, will you put a match to it? I said, I can't do things like that. I want you to promise me that. So all these, sounds really stupid, doesn't it? So we did all that. Anyway, at that particular time, Noel was about to go off to Cyprus to be interviewed to be an army pilot. That was all cancelled. The next thing that came through was they were sending him on a drill course to Caterham instead. By then, things had begun to settle down quite a bit, and we were able to take the car home. So our worldly goods were packed into this Beetle with just enough room for me to get in the front. And we went down to Benghazi. No car ferries in those days. The Arab that we had to go through to put the car on the boat said, unpack it all. And to my complete and utter horror, Noel said, "You want it unpacked? You unpack it." And of course, he wouldn't unpack it. And I said to him, "Do you know what? When they're swinging this beetle onto that ship, they'll drop it in the water and we'll have no car and no nothing because you're being bolshy, you know." Little knowing really that it was your nerves getting the better of you, you know. But anyway, we got on this ship. The car was put on, the very front, and was covered in seawater. Maybe it was his way of getting back at us, I don't know. But anyway, we got on this ship, separate cabins, and I do remember between there and Malta, which was the first stop, the sea was like a mill pond, and I was so seasick you wouldn't believe. But I think, looking back, it was probably a bit of reaction.
A reaction.
You know,
yes.
relaxing
Yes.
and all that. Anyway, we in the meantime moved our money to Sicily, and we landed in Sicily and got off the ship, only to find that the banks were shut. Couldn't get our money out, so we had to go and find a hotel and stay there. And then, believe it or not, we motored the whole way from there to Southend in Essex to Noel's people in our Beetle.
Quite an adventure.
Quite an adventure. It was had after a while, after a few days, the pair of us began to relax. So you were enjoying it, having, you know, been a nervous wreck. You were enjoying it. So we motored all the way home. And then we get and stayed in Noel's mother's, and Noel went off on the drill course, came home a couple of weekends, could hardly speak, had his hair shaved virtually off. All he did the whole weekend was bull boots and clean buttons and God knows what else, and press uniform, as though he was like a wee trooper again. And lo and behold, he was then told that he was going back out to RAF Aden. And so he took me up to Wheaton, allegedly to put me into a quarter, only to arrive up there and there was no quarter for me. And I was put in a private hiring in Lytham St Anne's, millions of miles from everybody, on my own-io, and he went back to Aden. Look, came back then at Christmas. We came over to Ireland for Christmas, and then when we came back again, we stayed in the hiring for a wee while. I was working then in Wheaton for, by then it was Lieutenant Colonel Wathen, and went to work every day. And then we moved a bit closer. And Wheaton actually was a happy time for us as well. We got a nice brand new quarter on an estate. And in fact, that would have been about the time that I remember you and Joyce getting married.
That's right, 1969.
And you coming and asking me, would I do some typing for Joyce?
Her dissertation.
Her dissertation. And I've tried long and hard. I did quite a few dissertations in my time for wives, to the subject, what it was all about. But I knew, I mean, she was part of her teacher training, wasn't it, at the time?
Yes.
And no, but it was a good time. And then Noel then went with our cat, which we'd got in Benghazi, by the way. We took in a stray cat in Benghazi. The cat flew home, and we came in the Beetle.
Right.
And then we picked the cat up, and then when we were posted from Wheaton out to Hereford, Noel went in the Beetle again with the cat, and I flew out with the regiment in a blizzard. And we arrived in Hereford, and the snow must have been 3 or 4 foot deep. And he had a horrendous, absolutely horrendous journey. I stayed with Pam Nesbitt for a couple of days while the quarter was actually being cleaned, because the flat we'd been allocated was pretty dirty. And her and I spent hours every day digging a hole so Noel could park the Beetle. And when he did arrive, he parked the Beetle and it stayed there for 2 weeks and didn't move because you couldn't drive after that winter in Hereford.
I do remember it.
And you would. And then Hereford was wasn't very long at all. And it was while we were in Hereford that I was lucky enough, after having had a few miscarriages to become pregnant with Kevin, our first born. And then we moved to Munster, and I didn't work or anything in Munster. And Munster was a good posting. It was a nice posting. And the two children were both born in BMH Munster, believe it or not. And then you went to Cyprus, the regiment went to Cyprus.
74.
No, was it 70? Our Sarah was born in 72, so it was 73.
73.
73, you went to Cyprus.
I was in Northern Ireland at the time.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, we were in a private hiring in Lisbon.
Oh, dear God. There you go. Well, there you go. They went off to Cyprus because as a regiment you couldn't come over and do an operational tour over
That's right.
here at the time. So you got United Nations, they all done blueberries. And because the kids were young enough and not at school, Noel brought the children and I out there at his own expense for about 8 weeks in Cyprus, which there again couldn't use the naffy because he was United Nations. Saw very little of him, but at least we were there. And then I flew on home, and we all ended back up in Munster. And it was when he came back to Munster then that he was told to fill some forms in, which the chief clerk hadn't a clue about. I remember, and Walter Lauder coming round to me and saying, because I'd worked for the Army for so long, Jean, do you know what these forms are? Haven't a clue. And they were commissioning forms. And he was commissioned in the November of that year before we all went to Catterick.
It was quite a step.
A big step from
Because, of course,
WO2.
a short service commission at that time was a very short period of time, and you could have, at the end of it...
But it wasn't a short service commission, you see.
You
got a special regular commission,
That's right.
which was such a surprise.
Yes.
And the next thing really was moving to Catterick, which was lovely. And then the other thing was the very first venture to the officers' mess, and it was a lunchtime, and it was sergeant's mess to the officers' mess, and he was in work and I was joining him. And I can remember driving up to Wakeworth Barracks and going into the mess, and Richard Keatley, well, I met Jeremy Kerr on the way in, and he said, come on Jean, you're coming in with me. Bearing in mind, having worked for the regiment for so long, I knew most of them anyway. Anyway, Richard Keatley was very kind, and he met me at the door as well, which I thought was really nice, and took me in and said, come on around, I'll introduce you to everybody. Which he started then to introduce me to all the officers. And after about 3 hugs and kisses from different officers, he said, I really don't think, Jean, that I need to introduce you to these people. You probably know them better than I know them. And he left me, which was true. And that was, Catterick was a good couple of years as well. And I can remember Patrick Brooking taking over. And I can remember Patrick Brooking coming down to the quarter. He was so delighted to tell Noel that he'd got his captain. And I thought, how nice for a commanding officer to come to your house and say, congratulations, your captaincy's come through. But as Patrick said to me at the time, we go back a long, long way. And my first memory, and I don't know, it might be your first memory as well, of Patrick Brooking, was being Cinderella in the regimental concert in Catterick in 1956 at the pantomime. And we all went to watch. And there was this tall officer who was Cinderella. So, you know, you go back with lots of people and lots of memories in the regiment as well. And so really then after Catterick we went to Osnabrück. Another good posting. Went to work for the regiment again for my sins, and it was during that time that the regiment came over to County Fermanagh for the operational tour.
81.
And that's absolutely right. And it was a worrying time, because don't forget, because I was from Belfast, at times I couldn't come home and see my family, so we always made arrangements to meet up in England or Scotland or something like that. And then Noel coming over here. And then whilst they were away, the wives were brilliant. The wives were absolutely amazing, how they coped. A lot of wives came into their own. That's the only way I can describe it. We all looked after one another. Wives that would have been what I would call mice, for want of a better way of putting it, all of a sudden realised that actually they could cope quite well without their husbands, and had lots of ideas for different things to keep us all amused while the men were away. And their behaviour was brilliant, and everybody joined in, and the rear party were fabulous. The band and the bandmaster were marvellous, because we put a concert on for everybody coming back. Put it on for the rear party first, and then put it on for the colonel of the regiment's visit, who was Monkey Blacker, and all the boys coming back. And it took guts to get up in front of your own husband and sing and all that, you know, but the wives were really, really good. And it was during that time that Noel was posted to the Royal Yeomanry in... Oh, no, I'm lying. He was posted back to the headquarters in Lisbon as the G2...
Yes, you did.
Peon on the press desk for 2 years. And it was lovely being back home, because I was able then to see my family and my mum and dad and sisters and brothers and nephews and nieces, and that was a lovely 2 years in Lisbon, and a job that he really, really did enjoy. Again, first 6 months didn't work, then was approached, would I go and work in the headquarters? So I ended up going back working for the Ministry of Defence in the headquarters up in Lisbon. And then he was posted to the Royal Yeomanry after that. Totally different move altogether, because you then got a removal van. You didn't have to pack 60 million MFO boxes, as we all know so well, and label them and all.
I've still got a couple in my garage at home. And I think they've not been opened since we moved in 28 years ago.
Well, time you opened them and sorted them out. But anyway, he was posted to the Royal Yeomanry in London, and didn't particularly enjoy the job. And I, again, Kevin was still at boarding school. Sarah went to a local school. Having passed the 11 plus in Northern Ireland, we had a little bit of a problem with the local primary school when she went, and they sent for me. And having become a school teacher, but as a child she was the world's worst for changing, you know, year to year. And I thought, she's playing up. But it was to tell me that she was way ahead of the local kids, having been at local school here in Lisbon. And what was I going to do about it? And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, you know, her father's in the army, and army people don't pay income tax and national insurance and all. And I said, I think you're badly informed. They pay exactly the same as any civilians do, and have done since time immemorial. So, you know, you need to get that. You know, his attitude was sort of, I'm not going to put an army child through to go to secondary school earlier, because there will be a far more deserving case of a civilian child. So I put him straight on that, and I said, you know, I'm removing her from that school. And that we did actually remove her, and she went to a private school in Chertsey then, which was good, and she never looked back from then, you know what I mean? But it was during that time that Noel, though he wasn't aware of it at the time, and I had to point it out to him, that David Part, who had been the Honorary Colonel of the Royal Yeomanry, in a roundabout manner headhunted him to go and work at the General Trading Company in London.
Right.
And I actually said to him, you know, he asked, the way he got round it, he said to Noel, do you know anybody that would come and work for me and get my admin and all sorted out? I need a sort of like admin person to come and do it. And I said to Noel, are you thick or what? Which didn't go down well. If you know Santry, it wouldn't go down well with Noel Santry. And he said, what do you mean? I said, he wants you. Can you not see he's offering you a job? Don't be ridiculous, he said. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he went and worked at the General Trading Company, left the army early, which was a big step to take, as anybody leaving the army will tell you. No matter whether you're leaving after 22 or 30 years, it's still a big step going into Civvy Street. But it worked out extremely well. He was as happy as Larry. We bought our second house, and that was lovely as well. And it was shortly after that he was asked to become... He was always on the committee of the OCA, but it was shortly after that when...
The OCA, the Old
Comrades Association, right. That he was asked, would he be interested in being the chairman of the Royal Dragoon Guards Old Comrades Association. And he considered it a privilege, which he did, which still kept the regimental connection going the whole way through. Right. And it went on even when he retired and we moved over here, and he got heavily involved with the refurbishment of the Fusiliers Museum to make it the Inniskillings Museum, and the Inniskilling Dragoons have a good bit of that as well. So, and that's how we ended up here in Enniskillen. He said he would bring me home after all those years traipsing round with him, but he wasn't keen to settle in England. He would settle in the north of Ireland, and he said one of the best places would be Enniskillen, and we came house hunting here. So not only am I coming back to my roots, but Noel's family were all Southern Irish to start off with, so really he was coming back home to his roots. But I can honestly put my hand on my heart and say my time as a child in the regiment and the time as an army wife were all happy, happy times. Ups and downs like you would have in any walk of life, but the biggest thing that stays with you to this very day is being part of a big family, a regimental family. And I don't care who you would talk to, whether they're army wives or whether they're army children, they would probably all agree with me. So is that enough for you? I'm now 70 years of age and I can still remember it as though it was yesterday.
Thank you, Jean.
You're very welcome, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Very welcome, love.